Broadway critics said Sammy Davis Jr. was just a nightclub act who could never carry a leading role. 6 months later, Mr. Wonderful was the hottest ticket on Broadway, and those same critics were calling him the most dynamic leading man they'd ever seen. It was September 1955, and Sammy Davis Jr. was at the absolute peak of his nightclub career. He was selling out the Copa Room in Las Vegas, packing houses at the Copacabana in New York, and earning more money than most movie stars. But despite all his success, there was one thing that continued to elude him: respect from the legitimate theater world. Broadway was considered the pinnacle of American entertainment, the place where real artists proved their worth. Nightclub performers, no matter how talented, were viewed as second-class citizens in the entertainment hierarchy. They were considered entertainers, not artists; performers, not actors; and certainly not leading men. The conversation that would change everything began in the offices of Cy Foyer and Ernest Martin, two of Broadway's most successful producers. They had just acquired the rights to a new musical that they believed had tremendous potential, but they were facing a problem that was becoming increasingly common in the mid-1950s theater world. They couldn't find a leading man with enough talent to carry the show. The musical, originally titled The Entertainer, was the story of a nightclub performer trying to make it on Broadway while dealing with the complexities of fame, family, and the entertainment business. It required someone who could sing, dance, act, do impressions, and play multiple instruments, all while carrying a romantic storyline and commanding the stage for 2.5 hours. "We need someone who can do everything," Foyer said during a production meeting. "Someone with the talent of Sinatra, the energy of Gene Kelly, and the charisma of Cary Grant." "That person doesn't exist," replied Ernest Martin. But their casting director, Marion Dougherty, had an idea that was so unconventional it bordered on revolutionary. "What about Sammy Davis Jr.?" she suggested. The silence in the room was telling. Foyer and Martin looked at each other, then back at Dougherty. "Sammy's incredibly talented," Martin said carefully, "but he's a nightclub act. This is Broadway. This is legitimate theater. Besides," added Foyer, "he's never carried a show as a romantic leading man. That's a very different skill set from what he does in nightclubs." Dougherty had expected this response, but she was prepared with an argument. "Have you actually seen him perform recently? I mean, really watched him? He doesn't just sing and dance, he becomes different characters during his impressions. He tells stories. He connects with audiences on an emotional level that most Broadway actors would kill for." The producers agreed to attend one of Sammy's performances at the Copa, not because they were convinced, but because they respected Dougherty's judgment enough to investigate her suggestion. What they saw that night changed their understanding of what Sammy Davis Jr. could do. They watched him transform seamlessly from comedian to dramatic performer, from singer to storyteller, from entertainer to artist. They saw him connect with an audience of 800 people, as if he were having individual conversations with each person in the room. Most importantly, they saw something that surprised them: vulnerability. Beneath all the energy and showmanship, Sammy was revealing genuine emotion, real experiences, authentic struggles. He wasn't just performing for the audience, he was sharing pieces of himself, which is exactly what the best Broadway leading men did. After the show, Foyer and Martin met with Sammy in his dressing room. "We have a proposition for you," Foyer began. "We want you to star in a Broadway musical." Sammy's response was immediate. "I'm interested, but I have conditions." This surprised the producers. They had expected gratitude, not negotiations. "I want my father and Will Maston in the show with me," Sammy continued. "The Will Maston trio has been together for decades, and if I'm going to Broadway, they're going with me." "This isn't a variety show, Sammy," Martin explained. "This is a book musical with a story, characters, and a romantic plot line." "Then write parts for them," Sammy replied simply. "Make it work." What happened next was unprecedented in Broadway history. Rather than trying to fit Sammy into an existing show, Foyer and Martin decided to build a musical around him, incorporating not just his talents, but his real-life story and relationships. They brought in a team of writers: Joseph Stein, Will Glickman, Jerry Bach, Larry Holofcener, and George David Weiss, and gave them an unusual assignment: create a Broadway musical that showcased everything Sammy Davis Jr. could do while telling a story that audiences would connect with emotionally. The result was Mr. Wonderful, a musical about a nightclub performer named Charlie Welch, who gets his big break on Broadway, but must navigate the complications that success brings to his relationships with his father and uncle, his romantic life, and his own sense of identity. It was essentially Sammy's life story wrapped in a Broadway musical structure. But even with a show written specifically for him, the skepticism from the Broadway establishment was immediate and harsh. Walter Winchell, the most influential entertainment columnist in America, wrote Sammy Davis Jr. is a tremendously gifted nightclub performer. But Broadway leading man? That's like asking a race car driver to perform brain surgery. Brooks Atkinson of the New York Times was more diplomatic but equally doubtful. Mr. Davis's energy and talent are undeniable, but the transition from nightclub entertainment to legitimate theater requires skills that cannot be learned overnight. The criticism wasn't just professional, it was also racial. In 1955, no black performer had ever starred as a romantic leading man in a major Broadway musical. The assumption, spoken and unspoken, was that white audiences wouldn't accept a black man in that role, especially in a story that included romantic elements. Sammy was aware of every criticism, every doubt, every skeptical preview article, but instead of being discouraged, he used the negativity as motivation. "They think I can't do it," he told his father during rehearsals. "They think I'm just a song and dance man who got lucky. I'm going to prove them wrong." The preparation for Mr. Wonderful was unlike anything Sammy had ever undertaken. In nightclubs, he could rely on his natural charisma and improvisational skills. On Broadway, everything had to be precise, repeatable, and integrated into a larger story structure. He worked with acting coaches to develop the character of Charlie Welch as a fully realized person, not just a vehicle for his talents. He studied with voice teachers to learn how to project his voice to the back of a 1,200-seat theater 8 times a week, without losing his vocal quality. He worked with choreographers to create dance numbers that served the story rather than just showcasing his skills. Most challenging of all, he had to learn to be a romantic leading man, something that required him to be vulnerable and intimate in ways that nightclub performing didn't demand. The rehearsal process was grueling. Director Jack Donahue pushed Sammy to find emotional truths in every scene, to make every song feel like it was being sung for the first time, to create chemistry with his co-star Olga James that would make their romance believable to audiences who had never seen a black leading man in such a role. As opening night approached, March 22, 1956, at the Broadway Theater, the pressure was enormous. Advance ticket sales were strong, driven largely by curiosity about whether Sammy could succeed in legitimate theater. But the critics remained skeptical, and their reviews would determine whether Mr. Wonderful lived or died. Opening night was electric with anticipation and tension. The audience included Broadway veterans, entertainment industry executives, nightclub regulars who had followed Sammy's career, and critics who were prepared to document either a triumph or a disaster. From the moment Sammy stepped onto the stage, something magical happened. All the technical preparation, all the character work, all the vocal training came together in a performance that was simultaneously familiar and revolutionary. He was still recognizably Sammy Davis Jr. The energy, the charisma, the incredible range of talents were all there. But he was also Charlie Welch, a fully realized character with genuine emotions, believable relationships, and a compelling story arc. The audience was captivated from the first number. They watched Sammy sing romantic ballads with surprising tenderness, deliver comedy with perfect timing, and navigate dramatic moments with an emotional honesty that many seasoned Broadway actors would envy. But the real test came during his duets with Olga James. The romantic chemistry that the producers had worried about was not only present, it was palpable. The audience believed in their relationship, invested in their story, and responded to their scenes with the kind of emotional engagement that separates good theater from great theater. By the time Sammy launched into the title song, Mr. Wonderful, in the second act, the audience was completely his. The number, which showcased his singing, dancing, and showmanship while advancing the plot and revealing character, brought down the house with an ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. When the final curtain fell, The standing ovation was immediate, sustained, and genuine. This wasn't polite appreciation. This was recognition of something special, something that had exceeded every expectation. The critics who had been prepared to write dismissive reviews found themselves struggling to explain what they had just witnessed. Here was a nightclub performer who had not only succeeded in legitimate theater, but had redefined what a Broadway leading man could be. Brooks Atkinson, who had expressed doubts before opening, wrote in his review, "Mr. Davis has not merely made the transition from nightclub to Broadway, he has transformed what we thought possible on the musical theater stage. His performance is a masterclass in charisma, skill, and emotional truth." Walter Winchell, who had compared the casting to asking a race car driver to perform brain surgery, published a retraction, "I was wrong about Sammy Davis Jr. and Broadway. What I witnessed last night was not a nightclub performer trying to do theater. It was a complete entertainer, proving that talent knows no boundaries." But perhaps the most significant review came from Richard Watts, Jr. of the New York Post, who addressed the racial aspects of Sammy's casting directly. "Mr. Davis's triumph in Mr. Wonderful proves that audiences are ready for leading men of all backgrounds, provided they possess the talent, charisma, and emotional authenticity that great theater demands." Mr. Wonderful ran for 383 performances, becoming one of the most successful musicals of the 1956 Broadway season. More importantly, it changed the perception of what kinds of performers could succeed as Broadway leading men. The show's success opened doors not just for Sammy, but for other performers who had been considered just nightclub acts, just recording artists, or just entertainers. It proved that talent could transcend categories, and that audiences were hungry for performers who could deliver authentic emotion along with technical skill. For Sammy personally, Mr. Wonderful represented validation that went beyond commercial success. He had proven to himself and to the entertainment industry that he was not limited by other people's definitions of what he could or should do. "They said I was just a nightclub act," Sammy reflected years later. "But what they didn't understand is that nightclub performing taught me something that a lot of Broadway actors never learn: how to connect with an audience as individuals, how to make every person in the room feel like you're performing just for them. When I brought that to Broadway, along with all the technical training, it created something new." The impact of Mr. Wonderful extended far beyond its original run. It demonstrated that Broadway could be a place where barriers were broken, where assumptions were challenged, and where talent could triumph over prejudice and preconception. Sammy Davis Jr. had not just made the transition from nightclub to Broadway. He had proven that sometimes the most dynamic leading men come from the most unexpected places, and that the best way to respond to people who say you can't do something is to do it better than anyone thought possible. If this incredible story of breaking barriers, exceeding expectations, and proving critics wrong inspired you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to remember that your background doesn't limit your potential, your talent and determination do. Have you ever been told you weren't qualified for something you wanted to do? Let us know in the comments how you proved them wrong. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing stories about legends who refuse to be defined by other people's limitations.